Welcome to Open with Alex, where every episode is a journey into diverse perspectives and compelling stories. I'm your host, Alex, and together we'll explore the depth of the human experience. Get ready to open up to new insights and inspirations with each guest. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of Open with Alex. Today, I have a very interesting guest. We really don't know how we cross each other's path. We found each other through probably algorithms because we're into the same wavelength. I know he's a spiritual coach. He's also an author. And he has a very interesting story of life. So welcome to my podcast.
Thank you.
Robert, thank you for being here. This is the first time we see each other in person. Right. He has a nickname for me. He called me Hollywood because he thinks I work in movies and commercials and all of that, which I do.
It's just a way to remember.
It was a way to remember. But I really wanted to talk to you because it is very important for me to share the message of how people come out of their worst, darker stories.
Right.
So, but let's start by asking you about your success before the dark stories. What did you used to do?
Well, okay, but first of all, the success is actually the dark stuff in your life, right? Because that is actually where you evolve and grow the most. So what the world calls a success is really not all that successful.
Yep.
But it's a beautiful aspect of life. And I'm not any of these things. I'm just a human being figuring it out, just like any of us are. So, but having said that, so my background story is I was born in Holland, actually on the right side of the tracks. I had a beautiful childhood, nothing to complain about. My father was a product of World War II though, and he was a tough guy, tough love, but he was a really, really dedicated father. My mother was more spiritual oriented. She was an astrologist as well. And so she planted a few seedlings of spirituality.
Oh, okay.
But this was in like the 1980s when this wasn't very
I was going to
popular
say,
yet.
I thought I dug enough, but I didn't know that about your mom.
No. So I was like, when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, my mother would take me to doctors that would read my aura and, talk about chakras. And I was fascinated by it. The thing is, when I would go to my friends and I would talk about, I just went to a doctor to read my aura, and people are like, "What, are you smoking crack cocaine?"
It wasn't that popular.
No. This wasn't like something that was very mainstream. But when I was 21, I dropped out of college to the chagrin of my father, and I went to Australia to sell yachts. I just wanted to be free. I just wanted to explore. I went backpacking. Then I became a professional tennis player. I was a good tennis player in my childhood. And I kind of pursued that for a few years, and in my mid-20s, I ended up in Atlanta just before the Olympics, and I got into real estate, and then I put myself through night school, and I started, chasing this American dream. And
you accomplished it.
Yeah, I mean, the way the world tells you the dream looks like.
Yeah.
So I was pretty good in real estate, and I worked very hard.
The American dream, that's why I said.
The American dream.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I went on to Columbia Business School and GE, and I made it very big in GE, and I went into business for myself, and I was this guy that everybody applauds. I made relatively a lot of money, and I had the beautiful oceanfront home, and I had the beautiful wife and the kids and the toys and the cars, and I went local because I had a big business in Latin America. As you know, in Venezuela, I did what all men did, power do in Venezuela or in Latin America, and I really kind of fell in trap to power, money, women.
Ego. That's what you call it.
Yeah, it's kind of what the world tells you success looks like as a man.
Yep, unfortunately.
Yeah. And when you have a big alpha energy and it gets you a lot of applause and it gets you recognition and accolades. And then when you have a deep father wound because your father never really fully saw you, you can start to express these things in ways that are less than pretty. And I sure did.
Yeah. And how did you begin to see that you were doing that? Because that's the hardest thing, is that mirror. Was it because of how things went down after that?
Yeah, so I sold most of my business in 2015, and I remember flying back on the flight from Bogota, and I was like, I'm supposed to be happy right now. In my early 40s, I made it, I mean, I got the money, I got the house, I got all of it, right? And I felt really, really empty because a part of me knew that I sold my soul.
It was on your head.
And
You went to your head.
I got lost in it. I got lost in the world. I got lost in the material world. And so I had a spontaneous spiritual awakening, actually. And my claircognizance and clairsentience came online. And at the time, I had no idea what all this was. I had no idea what an awakening was. But the universe, basically what I call now, dropped the truth serum.
Oh.
And as I went on this journey, nothing made sense anymore. You know, my life didn't make sense anymore. The world didn't make sense anymore. And for a while, I thought, like, well, maybe I need to go back and make even more money. Maybe I didn't make enough, right? But at
Were
this
you still
point,
married when this happened? Or that had already fallen apart?
I was still married for another 2 years, but we were very disconnected because I was changing a lot. And I wasn't the man anymore that she married. And eventually we did have actually a very amicable separation. And a week after that decision in 2017, I had a hurricane that wiped out a business. And I had a personal guarantee on it. And because that's what happens in real estate development. You know, most of the projects are personally guaranteed.
You had a personal guarantee.
So between the divorce and a personal guarantee and a hurricane and the insurance didn't pay out and lawsuits about the building permits, and I found myself at the beginning of 2018 completely stripped naked. The universe had literally undressed me. Everything that made me this successful, you know, player in the world that with the beautiful LinkedIn profile and the cars and all the machismo that he had, the universe completely stripped me naked. There was just nothing left. It was all just evaporated. And now I was presented with this opportunity to, you know, who am I really? When you take all this stuff away, right? Who are you really? And what am I here to do? What are we, all of us are here to do? And so this was sort of the revelation that came through pain.
And if I was going to define, what did you attach to? What do you think was that turning point that, besides your upbringing, obviously, that helped you start looking in the mirror and opening up like that?
I want to explain it in a little bit different way. I mean, the world tells us stories, right? The world tells us to, you know, for us to be a valuable man or valuable woman, we need to be X, Y, and Z. We need to be successful as a man. We need to have career success and money and power and, you know, all these things, right? All these material, outer world sort of things, you know, and that defines you as you're a successful man. Now you're worthy of idolization.
Those are societal.
Of course, and as a woman, you know, we're very much taught that, you know, you need to be pretty and this and that, and you need to have a husband and kids, and you need to be, you know, to be a worthy woman, you need to have all these attributes. This is all outer world stuff, because that's not really what we are. So I want to explain it to you in a different way, right? And so if you see as this entire world as sort of a game Spirit plays, right? Now, what is a game really? A game is where the reality is suspended and new rules come into play, right? So when I play a tennis game, the rules of tennis apply to that court.
Correct.
So what does that mean?
Yeah.
There's an arena, right? Now, what is the arena in life? The arena in life is Earth, right? So we're born into this arena, and then who are the players? Well, you and I are the players. We're human avatars, right? And all of us have a lot of machinery. So we have 5 senses, and we have a brain that's a computer. And so we interpret this outer world, and we look at it, and we navigate through this labyrinth called life, or Earth school.
But you knew this when you were in your ego self.
I'm explaining you now, you know, how to look at these things. And, you know, then there's rules, right? So as we kind of go through life and we go through crisis, catastrophe, calamity, right? We have all these encounters. We have events, we have people we meet and places we live and languages we learn. And why do we do all this? Because we learn that way. You know, we learn to interact with life itself. Life is teaching us. And so as we do all that, there's what's called interplay. And interplay is between everything that happens in your life. You and I just met on social media, and now we're having this conversation. But maybe you have someone you fall in love with. Maybe you have kids in your life, your parents, your siblings, your friends, your colleagues, you know, whatever. Everybody is just an actor that's written into your script and that has a role to play. I
agree.
And what happens is that we evolve, we grow. We always, you know, grow bigger and better.
But I think we tend to find it in different places. When I do the podcast, I always like to know, what was your place? Was it a place? Some people are a place of faith. Was it a book? Was
Well,
it the dark that you had to deal with?
Yeah,
that you
well,
had
my
to
life
see?
fell apart.
Yeah.
I mean, I had this life that I thought was real, and it had a lot of business success, and I had a wife and kids, and I lived somewhere, and I had all these circumstances in my life that I had created, and life had given to me, right? And then all of it fell apart. All of it just sort of slipped through my fingers.
Yeah.
And suddenly I was like, well, clearly I'm not that, because I'm still here, but my circumstances have changed. And so I thought I was this successful guy in the world and doing all these things, and I'm making a lot of money and this and that. But then what happens when you stop making money? What happens when you're no longer relevant in a player? What happens when you're no longer relevant in your business or in your sector? And I went from this really popular guy that got invited to all these dinner parties, and I was
To the unpopular guy.
I was relevant to my investors and all these things, and now I had a personal guarantee that was activated. I couldn't do real estate projects. I couldn't do private equity projects anymore because I was in financial ruin, and suddenly you have no relevance anymore. And so I had to wow, this is interesting. So if I'm something in the world, I have relevance. And then when I lose these outer world things, in this world, I have no relevance anymore. So what am I truly? What am I doing here?
Yeah.
And so I sort of had this internal realization as I started studying, everything from the Stoics to the, Plato, Socrates. I went into Vedic philosophy. I became a certified yoga teacher, certified medium. I discovered all these wisdom teachings. And what all of them are saying is what Pythagoras kind of summarizes is know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and God. And I went on this exploration. Know thyself. What does that really mean? Who am I? What am I? What am I doing here, right? And so I've come with these, one of the story I just told you.
Did you do all that study here? Did you stay in the United
For the
States?
most part, but I
Was it
traveled
mostly
all over the world
books?
as well, because for a long time I did have enough money to go around the world and go to every guru,
Retreat.
every retreat, every workshop, and I learned a lot because.
But it sounds to me like you were very curious. You wanted
I've
to
always-
find an answer.
Well, also because I was very, very depressed, borderline suicidal.
That's okay.
And I had 3 young kids. And I had in 2016 sort of one of these events that you will never forget. I lived in a very prestigious oceanfront community, and there was someone a few blocks away that walked into the mangroves at 5:30 in the morning, and he blew his brains out. And this was a third generation contractor. He was very successful, had a lot of money, had a beautiful family and kids. And of course, you can imagine in a sort of this prestigious neighborhood, this was like an uproar.
Did you know them?
I knew, I had seen him at the park. I didn't know him personally, but I knew who he was, right? And I remember everybody in the neighborhood was, oh, this is the disgrace. How could you do this and this and that? And I was like, man, I can totally understand why he did that. And then I was like, whoa.
Wow.
It's like,
Wow,
I can
yeah.
actually relate to being so lost and so
That you can
unhappy.
relate to what he did himself.
And I remember that night I couldn't sleep. And I went, as I did a little bit more often, I went into my kids' room. My kids were still very young. My youngest was only 3. And I would sit in my kids' bedroom. Now, I did this also when I was in my most hectic part of my career, because it was sort of one of these places, you have kids, right?
Yeah.
When you have a little kid that's breathing at night, it's like the most peaceful thing in the world.
Yep.
And when life didn't make any sense, I would just sit, you had the rocking
gives
chair.
you peace.
The breastfeeding chair, that
Yeah.
my wife would use, and I would sit there and I would just kind of listen to his breathing. And I was like, and in this situation, I was really like, oh my God, I can't do it. I can't end up there, I got to find a reason to live. And then I went into my daughter, who was probably 6 at the time, and I spent an hour, and then my other son, and I went back to bed, and I woke up that morning, and I gotta figure this out. I gotta figure a way out.
It was a turning point.
That was a big turning point, yeah.
So kids have a lot to do with it for
Yeah.
you. Being a dad,
Everything, yes.
and then finding a new meaning, I guess, for
Without
what you
my
were
kids,
doing.
I probably wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I would say the same thing about me.
I would have
my
cut
child.
off, because but it's an internal, it's a perception of suffering,
Yeah.
which is also justified.
Yeah.
But I was in a very deep
But,
place
but
of
it doesn't
suffering.
mean that you're deep inside. You're
Because life didn't make any sense
falling
to me
apart.
anymore.
Yeah.
And where I had ended up, because I was so attached to this successful image that I had created of myself, and when that kind of came apart, that was an ego death, right?
Yeah.
And
Bubble
and I
death.
wasn't the player anymore, and I wasn't like none of those things. I didn't have the money. I didn't have and I was like, well, if I'm not all of that, like I was in deep suffering about that, and I had to let go of that being me, and like go to a much deeper version of myself. Like, what am I really? Well, if you want to say God's child or whatever you want to call it, I mean, we're a representation of something much larger than us. Something that is unknowable because we can never fully know it. We can describe it, we can point at it. I tried in my books to point at it and give people a sense of what it is. But it's ultimately unknowable. But we are a representation of that. We are a fractal, a micro expression. Everything in nature, that tree is an expression of it. Because everything is created by something. There is some intelligence that permeates all life. There's no coincidences. There's no coincidences that we're sitting right here. There's no random events. There's no flukes. There's nothing of that. Because there's an intelligence that sort of guides and directs all of this.
And then you create your own new brand. What do you have in your shirt?
Well, Love and Truth came from, I told you, I did a lot of yoga, and then I really wanted to get into the philosophy of yoga. And so I became...
That's beautiful.
I did a teacher certification. And as I was spending a lot of time on the mat, I'm still also a very grounded guy, And I was, in a lot of the teachings, it's the yoga teachers usually are like, love and light, just think about beautiful
Love and
things.
light,
Love and
or-
light. And I was literally on my mat, I'm like, can I cuss?
Yes.
I said, fuck you, it's not love and light. I'm in fucking darkness. My life is a mess. My life fell apart.
Love and light.
Like light my ass. I mean,
Yep.
this is painful. This is dark. And I was like, so I was really like, this love and light thing is like, for me, it's love and truth. I want to find out the truth about myself. I buy the love part. I do think that is, so
That's
in
an
my mind-
ingredient.
No, it's actually what this entire universe is made of, right? It's an energy that has intelligence, it has expressive powers, and it expresses everything into life. But the light part is like, it's not just light, but I do want truth. I want to figure out what is the truth about life. Because I think that's actually what we're all really trying to figure out. What is the truth about me? What is the truth about all of this stuff? And so Love and Truth became sort of this mantra that I adopted, and finally, a few years later, it became a book I wrote, which is sort of my manifesto, spiritual manifesto. But Love and Truth for me is really the essence of life. And, I want to be an embodiment of love to the extent I can, and I want to find truth. Isn't that what we all want?
Yep. Yeah.
Don't we want to know the truth?
I want to know I'm not sure if I want to know what
Right? Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you?
I'd rather stick to love. So that's why I was curious to ask you when you say love and truth, what truth? The truth about why we're here? Yeah. What they called your...
But what is the ultimate truth you're
Kundalini
going to
or...
What is the ultimate truth you're going to discover if you keep digging for the truth?
That's why I wanted to ask you, why truth?
Because the ultimate truth anybody is going to discover is that love is the secret sauce.
Right, so I'm sticking to love.
Yeah, but you have to discover that truth. And,
yes.
and when we look at our world today...
They're losing everything, too.
When we look at the world today, this is hardly a representation that love is the only truth, right? Mm-hmm. And so what the world is showing us, and this is, again, like we're in this game, this kind of labyrinth of life, where we all get to explore and find ourselves. And the way we find ourselves is to actually see the truth of darkness within ourselves.
Yeah, when you lose yourself in a dark place.
And so everything that happens in the world that we condemn, that we say, that shouldn't be happening, and that's terrible, and this is terrible, is like, if you use that as a mirror, right? And then say, okay, well, where do I still have this? Because it cannot exist in the world unless 8 billion people collectively create it. Because this is just a video game in that sense. And we're creating all of this, right?
Is that the truth you're talking about then?
100%. And so whenever I see darkness outside, the question is, where is this darkness still inside of me? Where do I carry hate? Where do I carry racism, bigotry, judgment, all these things. So whenever I see it in the outside world, it's really the game, if you want to refine yourself and ascend, is, well, where do I still have remnants of that darkness inside of me? And so for a man like me that got really successful in the world, successful quotation marks, right? I got lost in power and women and money. What darkness
Money does
was
that
there?
to people, though.
What
I don't
darkness
understand.
was there in me? So I can blame the world and say, well, the world did that because, the world told me this and the world. No, I had darkness inside of me. What was the darkness? My own wounds. My own wounds of not being enough, not being important enough, not being seen, not being heard, not feeling loved. So how do I express that? I go out in the world. But actually, I get lost in it. I get lost in money, and I now think that, because I have a whole harem of women around me, now I'm an important guy.
Because you have money.
But I'm breaking hearts, and I'm
That's how
hurting
you thought
people.
what you thought.
Right?
Yeah.
But so the thing is, like, there was darkness inside of me that drove me to these behaviors.
Got it.
Right? There's ways that I pursued money where I knew, this is not entirely kosher. I did a lot of business in Latin America. You're from Latin America.
Yeah.
I did airports. I worked with governments.
You had to pay
international
people to pay
banks.
people to get what you needed.
And if you're a smart gringo, you know that someone else is paying someone else somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I'm
But,
saying.
I never did it myself, but did I know about it? Deep inside of me? Of course I knew, right? And so you get involved in stuff that where now, I had a very interesting discussion about Bitcoin with someone. No, there's something very beautiful about the blockchain technologies and being away from central bank. But, what we're seeing a lot now in Bitcoin, it's also known that 20% of payments, right, have to do with drugs, human trafficking, and all that. So do you really want to make money on Bitcoin?
It's an underground market now. Yep.
It consumes the same amount of energy as the country of Sweden. And we do have an ecocide more than a climate change, but there are very problematic things with energy consumption in our world, right? And so when you're investing in Bitcoin and you're doing it just purely for financial gain, right, you are also taking on the karma of everything else that's associated with Bitcoin. And so you have a choice to make. And this is really becoming aware that, everything has a shadow side, right? And the more aware we become, the more our aperture of life opens up, the more you can make choices. And so I got an offer 2-3 years ago to go do a project in Latin America in my old industry, building airports and all this stuff. And actually, I didn't even need to do anything. They just asked me, just put a second proposal in so we have a second bid, because we already got the first bid rigged.
They just needed that to pull the trigger.
Of course, just a stalking horse proposal with my logo on it. And they said, you could do it in 5 hours. You just dust off the old reports, put some new things in there, and we'll pay you X amount of money, which was a lot of money. And at the time, of course, the universe always gives you this opportunity when you need it. And it was just starting with COVID. I was finishing my second book. I could have probably used the money. So it was just not a question from the universe. Like, okay, now you talk about all these things.
You have to practice.
But here's the kicker. So I turned it down. And it was a big number. It was 6 figures, $250,000 for doing 5 hours of work. And I could really use the money. And I was so proud of myself. I've really grown spiritually. I'm such a spiritual powerhouse now. And I was like, hold on now. What if it was $2.5 million? One more zero. Would you have said no?
Oh, wow.
And what if it was $25 million or $250 million? Because now at $25 million, maybe you're thinking, well, if I make that much money in 5 hours, I would build a nonprofit and I would do so much good with it. But I'm still selling my soul.
You're selling your soul.
Right? And so then I had this revelation, like, yeah, you did okay, you turned that down. But at what level can you be tempted? And so the only way to be spiritually fireproof is to have no number that you can be bribed at.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When there's no money, when you stand in your principles in such a principled
That they
matter,
cannot buy you out.
that there's literally not a number in the world that will sway you from that. So that was the lesson in that thing. Like, okay.
And you became after the book, I read you became a spiritual coach.
I did, yeah.
And
sort of a happenstance, because some people started reaching out and they were asking me questions. They were going for their own. So the way we wake up in the world, right? The truth serum gets dropped. The universe usually introduces some form of catastrophe, crisis, or calamity in your life. So something blows up. Your marriage blows up, your business blows up, something derails, you lose a loved one, you have a kid that, has an addiction. Something happens and it derails your whole life, which makes you stop in your tracks, and now you got to look at things. This is just the way the universe organizes things. So you have an opportunity to wake up. That's all it is, right? I mean, these things can really suck in real life. I mean, you can go broke, you can lose your marriage or your love relationship, your heart is shattered, but we have these pains, these suffering, because otherwise we wouldn't move. We wouldn't look into ourselves in a deeper way. And if everybody has these things in their life, and whenever we, get out of them, we look back in the rearview mirror and we connect the dots and say, yeah, of course, it had to be that way because I wouldn't have learned this lesson. I wouldn't have evolved in this way. I wouldn't have gone to this next timeline or this next evolution of myself. And I know you're sitting here, I know you've had pain in your life and you've had things that went horribly wrong, or wrong in the sense that they didn't go at the time the way you wanted to.
Yeah.
And then now you look back at it and you're like, oh my God, what a gift.
It made me who I am.
So these are gifts wrapped in sandpaper. And the more
sandpaper.
the more gifts you receive from the universe wrapped in sandpaper, the bigger the opportunity you have, right? To grow, evolve, and really prosper into your full potential and realize, know thyself. Who are you truly? So all these gifts show up, all this shit in our lives show up so we can learn. Everything always happens for our greatest growth, our greatest prosperity, and our greatest evolution.
Let me ask you this.
Except in the moment, it doesn't always feel that way.
No, it never feels that way in the moment. You go through all of this and you become the spiritual coach, you have your books, you have all this, that it's almost like transcendent for you. You become a new Robert.
Right.
And now you're into new, you were just saying, when I saw you coming in the studio, you have a new adventure.
Yeah.
So are you moving away from the spiritual Robert?
A little bit. I'll
Where
still
is
write
Robert
books.
going now?
Yeah, I'll still write books. I've run into some personal conflict in this space, this whole spiritual space, spiritual coaching, all this stuff. Because I think for a large part, it's a 3D business model with a spiritual wrapper around it. And people are just like, well, give me my pill, give me my Ozempic for spirituality, right? I don't really want to do the work. I just want to get a pill so I feel better tomorrow. And I don't just not believe in it. I think it's just absolute fucking nonsense. And so, and I really don't want to be pimping and prostituting myself all the time, because a lot of this game about, gaining clients or selling books. So there's a book I'm writing now. It's called The Art versus Business. And the fundamental premise of art, right, is creative beauty. That's the purpose of it. It's not to sell. If it sells, great. But the fundamental purpose of art is creative beauty.
Yeah.
The fundamental purpose of business is financial profits.
Yes.
Right? And these are two different games. Now, you can have a hybrid.
There's hybrids, or there wouldn't be
hybrids for
millionaire artists.
So, but for me, spirituality and writing books is about art. It's about creative beauty. I want to expose it. I want to share it as much as I can, but I don't want to change it so it becomes popular and I can sell it.
Got it.
Right? And so I am moving from a business perspective more into regenerative real estate. I'm going to go back into real estate development, but regenerative real estate, which is really regenerative agriculture, regenerative health, holistic wellness, regenerative capitalism, which I advise in, or regenerative economics as it's called as well. And so regenerative real estate is really thinking about placemaking from a holistic perspective. So we're always going to be placemaking. We're always going to need real estate in some way, but how can we do that is in harmony with regenerative principles of life itself, right? Which is nature, but also humanity and everything else. And so I'm moving more business-wise into that area. I'll still be writing books. I'll still be sharing it. I'll still be doing podcasts.
Oh, okay.
I'm just not going to make that my main thing, because I really, I like to do it more organically.
I like that.
And for me, this area of what I share is 100% about creating the most pure art that I can, because I channel as well. And every time I write a book and I channel it, I get to my publisher and it's like, well, it would sell better if we do this.
Oh, and they switch it. Oh, I hear that
and
so
I said,
much
you know,
from book
that's
authors.
nice for a novel and that's nice for, whatever, right? But I'm not in the business of that. I'm in the business of communicating what wants to come through me in the purest way I can do it, to be the purest vessel of what wants to be expressed through me. That is that work that I do. And I'm committed to that, not how popular it is. So if my book doesn't sell a lot of copies because it's more pure, I would be totally satisfied with that.
So you have the books,
Right.
and let's say we make a documentary about your life. What would we call it?
Well, do you know Ivanka Sanchez, by the way?
No.
She passed away last year, very tragic. But she was like you, she was a powerhouse Mexican woman. She spent 20 years at Univision in the movie production, and then she went out on herself. And she was devoted to making documentaries, but to highlight the heroine. So really female empowerment, right? Or feminine empowerment. And
So she couldn't do one of you.
No, she reached out to me 2 years ago because I do write a lot about that.
Okay.
And I have a particular vision for it that is really about sovereignty more so than feminism. I believe in feminine sovereignty, which is very different.
I read what you and I agree on those terms.
Which is very, very, very different.
Let the woman be a woman.
Absolutely.
And let the man be a man.
Yeah, and we have a blend of both in each,
Yes,
right? And
I
this is not
agree.
about confusing who we are, but we have masculine and feminine energies, intelligences, and essences, and we each have a blend of those. So, Jesus' 40 days in the desert was integrating this. All the Egyptian mystery schools were about integrating these. This is where you get the holistic person, and we each have the opportunity to do that. But back about Ivanka, so she approached me and she said, I really want to do a documentary about you. I want to highlight your story. And here's the kicker. So it's finished. She finished it before she became ill. And I have not published it yet. It's
What's the name?
Never Enough Itis.
Never Enough?
Itis. This is my first book.
Never Enough Iris?
Itis. It's a disease. Like you have, ITIS.
ITIS?
Right? So my first book was Never Enough Itis.
Never Itis. Got it.
The disease of it's never enough.
Understood.
Which is the disease of our matrix.
Plain words.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's never fucking enough. Because when we're pursuing our happiness, our joy.
Instead of being unsatisfied at all times, it's
the thing is in the outer world, right?
Okay.
It's never enough. Because, I remember when I first made my first $100,000, I was like, oh my God, when I make $100,000, I'll be complete. And then you make $100,000 and it's like, well, I want to make $500,000,
Yes.
And then $500,000 becomes $1 million, and $1 million becomes $10 million, and then $10 million becomes $100 million. No matter where, and you want to have a house, but now you want a bigger house. And now you just bought this car, you love it, you've been dreaming about it, you spec'd it out, you ordered it, and 2 months later, it's just a fucking car. And then you're like, oh, but I really want that car, and I want to go on that vacation, and I want to, be with that person. And no, I already been
But
with
it's part of what helps us also.
Desire, there's nothing wrong with desire.
Desire is good.
But when we look in the...
Not that's going to make me happy, but that's not.
When we look in the outside world, that anything that we can touch, an event, a person, anything in the outside world, we think that's going to complete us.
No,
right?
I feel more that I enjoy it. It's part of life.
Right.
I have to.
Right.
Like when you take a delicious bite,
Right.
it comes, but
So
it doesn't complete.
True swat of evil, right? Really the joy for life.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to be fucking alive.
Yeah.
Right?
Me too.
That can be even when you are miserable. There's a paradox. Because you could be in deep suffering and still access this swat of evil, and just see it as a passing stage, because everything is always changing. Whatever suffering you have today, it's going to pass, right? When I was 16 years old, I had my first big love. We were together for a year and then we broke up. I thought the whole fucking world ended. I thought life is over.
Yeah.
Life will never be
Our
the same.
first love is always like that.
Right? And then it turns out 2 weekends later, I was back drinking a beer and,
You're doing fine.
And you're like, no, life moves on, right? And so there's nothing, when you lose your job, when you lose this or whatever, it actually turns out, no, life actually does go on. But we suffer for a little bit because we have to release it. We have to let it go. And all the thoughts and emotions and the disappointments and, maybe we felt screwed by someone or maybe this or that, we just have to let it go, right? But once we let it go, we move on with the movie. And the next part of the movie comes on. The movie just keeps going until you die.
I have to wrap it up. I'm going to be done with this movie. But before I leave, I want to ask you, because I didn't realize there was all these places in the world that you are part of. If I were to ask you one part that you would like to go tomorrow of the world, where would you go?
Like a physical part?
Yeah, what country?
Well, I'm almost going to say Venezuela because you're
God, liar.
You're from there.
It's a beautiful country, but...
I love the idea of going to the Maldives and you have these villages on top of the water.
I would love to go there, yes.
But I have to say, this summer I went for 2.5 months on a road tour, book tour / thing, and I really, Jackson Hole and that area of Wyoming.
I can't believe it.
That part of Yellowstone, that part of nature.
It's amazing.
So many parts in the U.S. and Canada. I was in the British Columbia Rockies
Wyoming.
as well. But that part of the world, I sat there. I remember I drove into Jacksonville towards the end of the afternoon, a summer day. It was probably late July. And the sun was, kind of setting over the cornfields, and I stopped. I had a trailer with Harley in it, and I stopped in the middle of nowhere. There was nobody to be found. And I sat there, literally, on the top of the hood of my truck, and I looked around, and I said, if this is the last thing I see before I die, I'll be all right.
You were good.
I would be okay.
You like nature. Good.
Oh, my God. That place just grabbed me in a way. It was just stunning, and what a beautiful place. Yeah.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
This has been enchanting. It's really interesting, like you were saying. That I really don't know. I think, like I said, it was an algorithm that brought us together. But thank you so much, Robert, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
If you love this story, please like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of this great team at Open with Alex and more inspirational stories.
Yeah, subscribe. She's wonderful.
You.